Okay, so picture this. You're driving through Addis Ababa, right? A city known for its like classic cars, its vintage cars, and bam, suddenly you're surrounded by all these electric vehicles like out of nowhere. It's like almost like a scene from a movie, where the past and the future just like collide.
It's pretty wild,
It's
yeah.
wild, and it's happening right now. We're not talking about some like far off future. This is today.
Yeah, it really is.
So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at an article by Samson Berhone. He's a business journalist who's been following the Ethiopian economy really closely. And his article, it really gives us this like front row seat to this whole electric boom that's happening in Addis Ababa. So like, what's going on? What's driving this sudden surge in electric vehicles?
Well, it seems like the Ethiopian government has made some pretty bold moves. They've actually banned the import of any new fuel-powered cars. And it goes even further than that. Like, even international organizations working in Ethiopia, they're being strongly encouraged, let's just say, to switch to EVs.
Wow, so they're not messing around, huh?
Nope, they're serious about this.
It's not just like a gentle nudge. It's like a full-on push toward electric.
Exactly.
But, I mean, a ban alone doesn't always, like, guarantee a change this big, right?
Right.
So what else is contributing to this, like, wave of EVs?
Well, Berhane, he points out another big factor, fuel prices. They've gone way up, like more than doubled in the past year alone,
Oh, wow.
making gasoline and diesel, much more expensive.
Yeah, that'll definitely make you think twice about sticking with a gas guzzler.
For sure.
So is this like a purely environmental move, or is there more to it?
It's actually kind of a multi-pronged strategy, By raising
Yeah.
fuel prices, the government's trying to do a few things at once. Reduce their reliance on those fuel subsidies, conserve their foreign currency reserves, which are super important, especially since Ethiopia imports a lot of their fuel.
So it's hitting those economic concerns as well as the environmental ones all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a pretty smart approach, especially with oil prices being what they are globally.
For sure. It sounds like a win-win, right? Like cleaner air, a more stable economy. But come on, there have to be some challenges too, right? I mean, nothing's ever that simple.
Of course, no transition this big is without its hiccups. And Burhan, he doesn't shy away from pointing those out.
Like what kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, Ethiopia is facing some economic headwinds right now. Things like high inflation, rising cost of living, all that. And electric vehicles, sure, they promise long-term savings, but that upfront cost, it's still pretty steep for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine the cost isn't the only hurdle, right? Like, what about just the practicality of owning an EV in Addis Ababa? Things like charging infrastructure, for example, is that even widely available?
That's a big one, yeah. While you see charging stations popping up in major cities like Addis Ababa, outside of those urban centers, it's a different story. The availability is still pretty limited.
So if you're living in a more rural area, or even if you just want to take a road trip, range anxiety becomes a real issue.
Exactly. It's that classic chicken and egg problem. People are hesitant to buy EVs because they're worried about charging. But then expanding that charging network, well, it requires more people driving EVs.
Yeah, it's a tough one to crack.
And it actually reminds me of something Berhane brings up in the article, this parallel to the early days of smartphones.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Think back to when smartphones were first introduced. They were pricey, the tech was still kind of new.
Oh, yeah, I remember those days.
There were concerns about battery life, network coverage, all that.
And it took a while for smartphones to really become mainstream.
Exactly, it took time.
So the question is, can Addis Ababa's EV market follow a similar path? Can they overcome these like early hurdles and really get to that point of widespread adoption?
That's the big question.
It's definitely a fascinating case study, especially as like the whole world grapples with this transition to cleaner energy. But zooming out for a second, how does Ethiopia's EV push fit into the global picture?
It's actually pretty significant, I think. Ethiopia, a country we often associate with its history, its culture, it's now positioning itself as a leader in this whole sustainability movement. And this move towards EVs, it aligns perfectly with that global effort to, combat climate change, reduce reliance on fossil fuels.
So they're not just jumping on the bandwagon, they're really trying to shape the future of transportation.
Absolutely.
That's pretty impressive. But Berhone also digs into some of the potential downsides of this rapid adoption, particularly where these EVs are coming from. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So the Ethiopian market is being flooded with these affordable Chinese-made EVs, which on the one hand is great, right? It makes them accessible to more people. But on the other hand, it raises concerns about quality control.
Yeah, I can see where that would be an issue. It's great to have more affordable options, but you don't want to compromise safety and reliability, especially with something as complex as an EV.
Exactly.
So what kind of quality control issues are we talking about specifically?
Well, Berhain mentions instances where some of these imported EVs have been found to have faulty batteries, wiring problems, even braking system
Well,
issues.
that's a bit concerning.
Yeah, and these aren't just minor inconveniences, they can be serious safety hazards.
And let's not forget those lithium-ion batteries, right? I mean, we all know those can be a fire hazard under certain circumstances.
Well, absolutely.
So it sounds like ensuring the safety and reliability of these imported EVs is absolutely paramount.
Couldn't agree more.
But what about the charging infrastructure itself? Is that posing any safety risks as well?
That's another area where Berhain raises some red flags.
Like what?
He describes situations where charging stations have been installed in homes and neighborhoods, but without proper safety standards.
Oh, wow. That's unsettling.
Yeah, it's like having this mini power plant in your garage, and it's not always done properly.
So what kind of risks does this haphazard installation pose?
Well, for one, it increases the risk of electrical fires. Improper wiring, overloaded circuits, using subpar components, it can all lead to overheating and potentially spark a fire.
Yikes. It's not good.
And remember, these aren't your typical electrical fires. We're talking about high voltage systems, much more difficult to put out.
So it's not just about getting people into EVs, it's about making sure that entire ecosystem supporting those EVs is safe and reliable.
Absolutely. It all has to work together.
It sounds like a multifaceted challenge, and I'm definitely curious to hear more about what's being done to address these safety concerns. But first, I think it's time for a quick break. We'll be right back after this short message. Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into Addis Ababa's electric vehicle revolution. And before the break, we were talking about some of the safety concerns around imported EVs and the whole charging infrastructure situation. It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done to make sure this transition is smooth and, most importantly, safe.
Oh, for sure. And Berhain, he really emphasizes that in his article. He's pretty adamant that the government needs to step up, implement stricter regulations for those imported EVs.
You're like, what kind of regulations are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, much more rigorous inspections at those entry points. It can't just be a quick visual check. We need thorough testing of the batteries, the wiring, all the critical components, and establishing clear safety standards that those imported EVs have to meet. Similar to what you see in other countries with, more mature EV markets.
So basically set the bar high and make sure only the vehicles that meet those standards are allowed in.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But what about people who have already bought EVs that might not meet those stricter standards? What happens to them?
That's a good point. Burhan suggests maybe a phased approach. Give those existing EV owners some time to comply with those new regulations. Maybe offer some incentives to upgrade their vehicles or retrofit them with safety features. It's about finding that balance, prioritizing safety without punishing those early adopters.
Yeah, you don't want to discourage people from making the switch.
Exactly.
But let's talk a bit more about the charging infrastructure. We touched on the safety hazards of those kind of haphazard installations. But what about the overall availability of charging stations? Is that keeping up with the growing number of EVs on the road?
That's a big bottleneck for sure. There has been some progress. The government's got this corridor development project. It's focused on installing public charging stations along those major highways. But it's not enough. More needs to be done.
So what's the solution?
Well, Burhan, he really emphasizes the importance of getting the private sector involved.
Yeah, instead of relying solely on government initiatives, encourage businesses to jump on board. Install charging stations at gas stations, malls, restaurants, apartment complexes, all those places people frequent.
It would make it so much more convenient.
Right. And it would create a whole new market for EV-related services.
Oh, absolutely.
Specialized businesses popping up to install, maintain, repair charging stations.
It has a whole new industry.
It's like this ripple effect, creating new opportunities, boosting the economy.
Yeah, it's exciting.
But let's not forget about the people, right? Are people in Addis Ababa actually embracing this change? Or are they kind of being forced into this new reality? And do they even have the knowledge and skills to navigate this whole electric shift?
That's a really important point and one that often gets overlooked. Burhan argues that public perception, public education, those are key.
So we need a massive public awareness campaign.
Pretty much.
Something that goes beyond just the environmental benefits, but really delves into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly.
Battery safety, charging etiquette, even basic troubleshooting.
It's like EV literacy for everyone.
I love that EV literacy.
And it shouldn't just be for car owners. It needs to extend to everyone. Pedestrians, cyclists, even emergency responders.
Oh, that's a good point. We talked earlier about those like lithium-ion battery fires. Those can be tricky. Are emergency responders in Addis Ababa even equipped to handle those situations?
That's another concern that Burhane brings up. A lot of firefighters, paramedics, they lack the specialized training, the equipment they need to deal with those high voltage systems and those battery fires.
And those are not your average fires, right?
Nope, they're different.
So what kind of training and equipment are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, firefighters need to understand the specific hazards of those lithium-ion batteries, how to extinguish them effectively. They need special gear, insulated gloves, boots, that kind of thing. And they need that specialized firefighting foam that's designed for these types of fires.
So it's a significant investment in, like, training and resources.
It is.
But it's worth it, right?
It'll
If
be
it prevents potential tragedies. And it's not just about the firefighters. It's about educating everyone who might be first on the scene.
Yeah, paramedics, other first responders, they need to know how to safely get people out of an EV after an accident, how to identify and isolate that high voltage system, how to provide medical care to someone who might have been exposed to like electrical shock or battery fumes.
It's like a whole new set of protocols and procedures.
It is.
It's a reminder that this transition to EVs, it's not just about swapping out gas-powered cars. It requires a systemic change. The infrastructure, education, even emergency response.
It's a big undertaking.
It is. It really is.
But despite all the challenges, there's this sense of optimism in Burhan's article. He really believes Addis Ababa has the potential to become a model for sustainable transportation, especially for other developing nations.
That's inspiring.
Yeah.
But what needs to happen for them to actually achieve that? What are the key ingredients for success?
Well, for one, the government has to keep up this commitment to promoting EVs. But they have to do it in a way that prioritizes safety, quality, accessibility, all of that. They need to invest in that robust charging infrastructure, implement stricter regulations for those imported EVs, and launch those like public awareness campaigns we talked about.
So it's a multi-pronged approach,
Mm-hmm.
requires collaboration between the government, the private sector, the public, everyone.
Exactly. It's a team effort.
And let's not forget about the potential economic benefits here. Burhane points out that the EV industry could create new jobs, boost local manufacturing, attract foreign investment.
It's a huge opportunity.
Like a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
One positive change leads to another.
Absolutely.
But are there any specific examples of how that's happening in Addis Ababa? Are there local businesses that are already thriving in this new EV landscape?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're seeing more and more companies popping up, specializing in EV maintenance and repair, battery recycling, even companies developing innovative charging solutions, ones tailored to Ethiopia's specific needs.
So it's not just about importing technology, it's about adapting it, making it their own.
Exactly.
But what about the cost? I mean, some people argue that EVs are still just too expensive for the average Ethiopian.
That's a valid concern. And while those affordable Chinese-made EVs have made a difference, they're still out of reach for a lot of people.
So how do we bridge that affordability gap?
Well, Burhan suggests exploring some innovative financing models, things like microloans or lease-to-own programs.
Make those EVs accessible to a wider range of people.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. But even with all that, there's still the question of, are people truly willing to make this change? Are they ready to ditch those gas guzzlers and go all in on electric?
It all comes down to public perception. Burhan really stresses the need to address people's concerns, range anxiety, charging time, the reliability of EVs. Showcase those success stories, organize test drives, create platforms where people can share their experiences.
Build trust and confidence.
Exactly.
It's a journey, that's for sure.
It is, and it's still in those early stages. There will be bumps along the way, challenges to overcome, lessons to be learned.
But that's what makes it so interesting, right? We get to watch it unfold.
It's like a living laboratory for sustainable transportation.
And Addis Ababa's leading the way.
It's exciting.
And who knows? Maybe the lessons they learned here will pave the way for other nations to follow suit. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's time for another quick break. We'll be right back to wrap up this electrifying discussion. And we are back, folks. Still diving deep into this electric vehicle revolution happening in Addis Ababa. It's a story of big ambitions, innovation, this real determination to create a more sustainable future. But like with anything worthwhile, there are always going to be hurdles. things to figure out along the way.
Yeah, it's a process for sure.
Before the break, we were talking about needing that multifaceted approach, getting the government involved, private businesses, the public. Everyone's got to be on board.
Hmm.
But what does success actually look like for Addis Ababa in this whole EV revolution?
Well, Burhan, he talks about creating this like self-sustaining EV ecosystem. It's not enough to just, import EVs. Ethiopia needs to become a producer, like a real hub of innovation in this whole EV space.
So, like, they're not just buying EVs, they're building them, manufacturing them, producing batteries, developing charging solutions.
All tailored to Ethiopia's specific needs.
It's pretty amazing.
It's a vision of empowerment,
Totally.
Not just adopting the technology, but shaping it, making it their own.
And that self-reliance,
Yes.
it goes beyond just manufacturing, right?
Right. Think about battery recycling, a huge part of the EV life cycle, but it often gets overlooked.
Yeah, if they can figure out how to, like, efficiently and sustainably recycle those EV batteries, reduce the environmental impact,
And create a whole new industry.
huge economic potential.
Thinking long-term, making it truly sustainable.
But let's be real, this isn't going to be easy. What are some of the biggest roadblocks they're going to face?
Well, access to capital is a big one. Building this kind of EV ecosystem, it takes a lot of investment. Infrastructure, research and development, workforce training, it all adds up.
So attracting investment both from inside and outside Ethiopia, that's key.
Definitely.
But it's more than just money, right?
Right. They also need to build up that local capacity.
So investing in education, vocational training, all that.
They need those skilled workers who can, design, manufacture, maintain, repair EVs, and all the infrastructure that goes with them.
Got to have the people power.
Exactly.
But even if you have the money and the manpower, there's still that question of, like, will people actually buy into this? Are they ready to, like, fully embrace this electric future?
That's where the communication, the public engagement, that's where it all comes in.
Got to get the message out.
The government, the private sector, they need to work together, address people's concerns, dispel those myths, build trust.
It's not just about selling EVs. It's about selling this vision of a better future,
A cleaner future.
a more sustainable future.
And it ties in perfectly with that, global push for climate action. Ethiopia could really be a leader here, showing the world how sustainable transportation and economic growth, they can go hand in hand.
It's a powerful story, and one that we'll definitely be following. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. If those, fuel-powered cars, if those were once a symbol of progress, what do electric vehicles represent for Addis Ababa today? For Ethiopia today?
Are they just a cleaner, more efficient way to get around, or are they something more, a symbol of a shift in mindset, a commitment to a different kind of future?
A future where technology and nature, they can actually work together.
That's the question we'll leave you with. Because the answers, they don't lie in the batteries or the charging stations. They lie with the people.
The people who are making this change happen. Thanks for joining us on this electrifying journey.
Until next time.